Okay.
Okay, good day, everybody. Thank you for starting this video. If you're watching this, you have expressed some interest, or perhaps you're wondering about Jewish meditation and our new Jewish meditation binge group, which is moving to Tuesday nights at 7:30 p.m. online. And with me is Jay Tarnow, who created this group several years ago. And we thought it would be helpful to have this orientation video for you to get to learn a little bit more about what we've been focusing on, what we've been doing over these last few years, so that you can be oriented and prepared to join us as we continue and deepen our experience with Jewish meditation. But first, Jay, why don't you introduce yourself and sort of share a little more about why you decided to start this group?
Well, the reason I decided to start the group as I've become older and more mature in my thinking and wiser is that actually I've been meditating my whole life, starting out with doing martial arts in my teenage years. And the reason was because I have ADHD, and I figured that I needed to have something to help me get centered, and be able to focus. And I found that doing martial arts and then eventually transcendental meditation, and then I've gone through every single type of meditation that I could find. And my friends would joke that I was a Jew. And I decided that I was going to become just Jewish and leave off the boo stuff. And the reason is because what I found is when I started getting into Jewish meditation, I found that the elements and the history are very similar in every culture. And I think there's something special about Judaism that started a lot of this meditative practice because of being a Hebrew being this verbal language, and that we were passing down and the story into traditions, but more importantly, we were passing down the prayers, and the prayers are meditations.
Right. So each of these prayers that we've explored in our time together, many of them have 6 words, and we've talked about mantras being connected to our prayers and learning about what the prayers mean, and then listening to them and experiencing them in different ways. What's been particular for you that it has been a good tool for you to sort of seize on with respect to meditation? What works best for you?
Well, there are a few different types of meditations I found to be helpful. And one that's very easy for people to learn is the breathing. Because the breathing, especially for someone who has ADHD or a monkey brain, as we call it, what happens is when you focus on the breathing, there's a physical part of it. And as a result of it, the physical part gets you to focus better and not get distracted. The other part of it is breathing is very clearly something that calms the body and calms the brain. And it's sort of the basis, even back to as I've gotten into it, the whole soul, and the coming with life force that comes into us from God.
Very true. In the Hebrew, they're so smart and they created the Hebrew languages. Even the Hebrew words for breath and for soul are related. Nishma, neshama, these words all have a connection and they're all related. One thing that we've looked at in the years that we've worked together is this book called Jewish Meditation by Aryeh Kaplan.
Hmm.
And we even went through it for chapter by chapter in our groups to learn these different techniques, breathing, visualizations, mantras. These are all different techniques that Jewish meditation explores. So if you haven't read this book yet, we highly recommend getting a copy of it, and we'll incorporate it more in our sessions. Uh, is there any other techniques that have been particularly helpful for you?
Well, I think that so we've talked about this prayers, but the other part of it is that the deep sense of the words in Hebrew. And I had learning disabilities, so learning Hebrew was very hard for me. But what I found is if I sing them, that I was able to remember it. And my Hebrew teacher, that was wonderful, he did everything by singing it to me. and made a record for me. I guess they probably do stuff like that in terms of the recordings, but that was so important, because when I find that I sing the words, that there's a deeper meaning and a connection that reverberates through my whole being. And that's what I find about the Jewish prayers. And I grew up, with my grandmother speaking Yiddish, and
Nice.
and Yiddish is all feeling. It's all these guttural feelings that are so connected, and it's part of our tradition in terms of Hebrew also.
Sure.
And that's I think that is really very, very significant. And that with the breathing and adding the breathing to it. But the thing we want to get across in this Jewish meditation is there are lots of different techniques, and we would like to explore all of them. We don't want to overly focus on one technique versus another, because each one of you are going to find which techniques really reverberates with you.
Right.
And that's what we want to do, is be able to find the one that connects for you. And then you practice that and practice that.
Exactly. It has become a group where we share different resources and we help people become even better in the skill that they're practicing. You've created a series of slides, which I want to go to so that we can make sure we cover some material. And so anybody joining us will feel like they've had some orientation and some already exposure to what we've been talking about. So I'm going to share my screen. This is the first one that you've created. What are we looking at here? What's important about this slide?
Well, the focus here is defining what is exactly is meditation. And it's what it is controlling your thinking, being able to focus your consciousness to one spot, one thing. And by doing that, it allows your brain to expand, that you're able to connect with different parts of your being, parts of your thinking, parts of your feelings and spirituality by this focus. Um, when we focus on one thing, what happens is we let go of the constraints of our brain and our mind. We start to gain control of our subconscious. We get access to a very deep sense of our being and our unconscious.
Right.
Um, and I want to tell you that you have to remember, by the way, I didn't say this, but I'm a child psychiatrist and an adult psychiatrist. So my background is in psychiatry. And as a result of it, that's one of the things that I use a great deal in my practice to help people in lots of different ways. So learning this is going to expand your mind, and it's going to expand your ability to be understanding yourself on a deeper level.
And a lot of times we'll open our sessions with music to listen to or to get us inspired on a particular theme or topic that relates to whatever we might be focusing on for the week. What
So
about
the
Jewish medicine? Yeah.
Yeah, so the unconscious mind is very powerful. And you all probably have heard that really we're only using like 10 or 15% of our brains. Where the meditation opens us up to a whole nother level of using more and more of our brain. And we're able to get into sort of memories, the reverie, and then the idea of letting go, and not being over controlling of our thoughts, but just letting them flow. That leads to this self mastery, of over our brain and spirit being in our bodies.
Right. That is one of the goals. What about
So,
why? Why do we meditate?
well, what we want to do is we want to think about life, our being in different ways, to be open to different ways of looking, and to have new experiences, and allow ourselves, to not lose track of who we are and where we're going. Um, and the whole thing about our lives is there's a progression from one place in our life in terms of the developmental stages, that we learn at every new developmental stage. We learn about what we have gone through, and then we get to start thinking about where we're going. And a lot of times, unfortunately, we block this out. We try to not think about where we're going or even where we've been. The idea of meditation is being where you are. And yet, by being where you are, you get to have the past, the present, and the future all together into one. So you're improving your awareness and perception of yourself and the world.
Beautiful. You also have Kabbalah listed there, which is a Hebrew word that means to receive, and is part of our mystical literature. And we get into some of the Kabbalistic imagery and Kabbalistic teachings, way beyond what Madonna might know, but into some of the more the depth of what Jewish learning can also invite us to learn more about. What are these different types of meditation?
So, you mentioned about the visual as one form, and which is that we can focus on an object. Probably you all have had that experience of focusing on a candle flame and focusing on that and that vision in front of you and letting yourself go into the flame. The other is audio, and we've been talking about singing, and there are a lot of other forms of audio meditations, um, by the way, that we can expand the brain by certain frequencies resonate. And that's the thing that's fascinating to me. Again, back to Hebrew. There are certain frequencies in Hebrew that seem to resonate with our body and brain. The
It's
breathing
fascinating.
you mentioned, the other part is that breathing, the sensations, focusing on a sensation. And the other one that is this cognitive paradox, which is to contemplate something that's unknowable. And by being able to contemplate on things that are unknowable, what happens is we expand our repertoire of thinking and how we think. And we struggle with these concepts, and that again expands our thinking processes, but connects with a spiritual level because, as we all know, God is unknowable. And yet we're always seeking to be able to find God and to know God.
That's right. You mentioned that the audio um, techniques help expand our brain, and we've created, together with your help, a resource. So you'll get access, if you're watching this video, to our Padlet resource, which lists and continues to expand with all of the different types of audio experiences and music that we've explored together, in addition to all the other things. And this video is also part of that Padlet, so you can go back and listen to it again. What about how? How do we meditate?
Well, what we're trying to do by focusing is turn off the monkey brain. And you all experience that when you sort of sometimes are sitting in a room that your brain starts to jump all over the place. And sometimes when you meditate, that's a problem, is our brain starts to jump all over. The idea of meditating is just letting go of the jumps, allowing them to go, to allow the jumps to happen, and to not get caught on any one thought or feeling. And it lets go that internal chatter that we have. The most important thing is what we have to do is never criticize ourselves. So one of the problems I had, again, probably because being a doctor, I kept on thinking, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? That's not helpful. So, and I know that we all second guess ourselves, but that's the other piece that meditation really helps, is we let go of that chatter and that second guessing ourselves, and letting that go. Um, and every time we let go, and then we focus again. So a distracting thought comes up, we let it go, and then get back to our mantra, get back to whatever it is that we're using for our focus. So this letting go of the critical self, that internal critic, very, very important. That is one of the benefits of meditation. Um, and so basically by turning off our chatter, we're turning on our brain, and we start to become aware of how powerful this brain is.
Amazing. That critical self is so important. And I know we spend a lot of time training our minds to not be critical of whether we're doing it right or wrong, because the brain is very powerful.
Yeah. And so that, the power allows us um, to open up what is it that we can do to not limit ourselves. So what else is it at every developmental stage? Um, and when the power of this meditation is to increase the intensity of the experiences by being here now, being in that moment, being in the present. Um, so you notice that with blind people, right, they learn to read Braille. But what happens is that they develop a third sense or fourth sense, fifth sense of sensing where the walls are, what the echoes are in a room, and that allows them to understand where they are. Um, and what's interesting is learning about Kabbalah is about how the practitioner is very in touch with feeling the pulse of themselves, the pulse when they walk into a room, the pulse of others in that room. And it gives them, and I must tell you that this has made me a much, much better psychiatrist because of the being in touch with that. I don't know. I always think about it is something that was God given to me. That ability that I can walk into a room and look at people and I can tell exactly what they're feeling within minutes. And it's very powerful. And I think it's based on the meditation that I've done in my life.
It's amazing. What else can meditation do?
Well, some people very, very note that they can have ESP, they can tell the future, and have these extrasensory perceptions. I think that what that's all about is that we train our brain. What's happening is we're being aware of all the information that we usually are blocking out. And so my experience being a psychiatrist and doing this is I can tell you where you're going, right? And the reason I can tell you where you're going is because I'm aware of so many things about you, your eye blinks, the color of your face, how the feelings change. All that level of awareness gives me a different sensory perception. And that's part of what meditation can do for all of us in our lives, is give us that. Um, and part of meditation is letting go of that ego, that narcissism, that thinking that we're the most important people in the world, and that oneness that creates a lot of loneliness. And I think that with meditation, we start to connect with how we're just a small little speck in the universe, but yet that speck is essential and important to the whole universe. Um, and and the reason that I keep on with Jewish meditation is it gives me a sense of my spiritual connection to God and to feel that. Um, and that's very important. So my view is the prophets, what they were doing is they were meditating and they going into these deep meditations and they got a sense of God.
That's
They got
right. That's right. We even have examples in the Bible where Abraham or Isaac or Jacob, they had these meditative experiences, and we read about what those felt like. Even Isaac, who was meditating in the fields in the afternoon, in the heat of the day, it specifically says that in the Torah. So we have a rich history of meditation, not just going back the last 100 years, but going back even to the days of the Bible and before. That Jewish meditation has a huge part of who we are. What about our oral tradition?
Well, we've been talking about this throughout, which is the oral tradition is that being passed down are very connected to a spiritual level. Um, and so the sounds we talked about, the prayers, um, the music, the story. So the story we tell every year on each of the holidays become part of that tradition, which connects us. And I'll use a frame that a word. that Jung used, right? And Jung was a psychoanalyst during the time of Freud, and Jung got into the spiritual nature of man, and let go of the sexual nature of man that Freud was on. And he talked about the cosmic unconscious, that all of us, when we listen, are connected to each other, and to really be able to listen to the universe in a different way. So I think that that's what our tradition is. And the more I study Hebrew and the more I study Judaism, the deeper this gets for me about my connection.
Very, very Kabbalistic, very, very Jewish in its perspective. Speaking of Kabbalah, there are three aspects of Kabbalah that you highlighted here. What are these?
Oh, I think you should talk about that because I think
Okay.
I feel like I'm a novice, and
Well,
you've been such a wonderful teacher. So
thank you. Thank you.
yeah.
There are different aspects of Kabbalistic experiences. The one that we do the most is this theosophical or theoretical, and even blessings, even saying a blessing and having an intention can be a Kabbalistic moment. It can be a spiritual experience if you have that right intention, if you set that right kavanah or intention. But theosophical is really in partnership with God. There's the prophetic, and then there's the practical, where things can actually, in our tradition, things have been able to be done magically with these Kabbalistic experiences or these techniques. Theoretical Kabbalah is based on the Zohar, which is one of the main books that was written in the 13th or 14th century in Spain. And a lot of our Kabbalistic and mystical experiences go back and date back to that time period, many hundreds of years ago. The teachings of Isaac Luria in the 16th century was another rabbi and mystic who saw the world and understood it as the creation through vessels and the shattering of these vessels with this beautiful light that was created when God said, "Let there be light," created sparks of holiness that have to be taken in and have to be found and discovered. And a lot of our spiritual practice is about doing that, literally repairing these broken vessels, or tikkun olam, literally creating and fixing the world, is what tikkun olam is from a Kabbalistic experience. Meditative Kabbalah is the mystical process of striving to achieve union with God. And that's a lot of what we try to do in our sessions. So we might explore it with different techniques, and then we'll talk about it. How did that feel? How did this feel? We'll also explore silence, which initially people were uncomfortable with, but as we become more accustomed to it, spending some time in silence, even together online, can create a very powerful meditative experience too. Practical Kabbalah is the process of engaging in rituals and summoning angels or demons, which Judaism believes as energy. These are different aspects of energy forces that are all around us, but we're not always sensitive to them. Using amulets and magical seals to actually change the world, that's who knows if that's possible, but it's something that a lot of people are very interested and fascinated about. So this is a way of opening up our minds and our eyes into many different aspects of our faith that might be foreign, that might be something we haven't explored very fully in the past. But we invite you to participate with us and to get to know some of these experiences and to try to experience something that is new, and give yourself some time and some patience because it takes a lot of work. What else should people know, Jay, before we conclude our session?
Well, I think the other piece of it is that we're all learning from each other. And I think that's very important that we find that people sharing their experiences with this, that each time we talk about it, I'm learning more and more. And David, you've been a wonderful teacher with this, and as you all can see about David really understands how to teach. And I think that having this experience with David background in Judaism and music, and law and his study, um, has been just fabulous for all of us to learn and for me to learn. And then my sharing my way of looking at the world, or in terms of being a psychiatrist and what that has done in terms of forming me, is that's the learning process that we have done, that has been so enjoyable and special. And that's
Yeah,
what we want to continue. We want to continue this openness with each other, and not for us to hide, but to be open, and yet to be comfortable with silence.
that's right. That's
That's
right.
the hard, and that is probably the hardest thing in life, is to be comfortable with silence, because again, especially these days, we're always stimulating ourselves, and that's our uncomfort with listening to the silence inside of ourselves,
That's
which is
right.
the only way to reach God.
That's right. That's beautifully said. Beautifully said, Jay. So, the silence, your experience with hypnosis, my experience with prayer, all of these are ways to achieve a meditative experience. And meditation doesn't only have to be in silence. There are many different pathways that we've explored, even ones that involve movement and dance. These are all ways in which we are in meditative states, sometimes without even realizing it. So, we invite you to be part of this group, to learn with us and to continue exploring a meditative experience. And we hope you have enjoyed this video. And we look forward to seeing you in our sessions Tuesday nights, 7:30 p.m. online. Thank you.
Thank you.